Hello dear Piano Excellence for Life participants. Today we are continuing to talk about technical matters, and in this lecture we're going to talk about one of the most important things if you want to progress technically is body positioning. And even though things that we're going to talk about today are familiar already at this point, but I do believe that it's so important to reinforce those ideas and this knowledge about proper body position on the piano, because even for me, after playing piano for more than 30 years, I still have to remind myself almost every time I practice what's the right thing to do. First, let's start with two physical objects that we need in order to play the piano. Is the piano itself and the bench that we use. So again, I remind you what's the proper way to proper distance, right, to sit at the piano. So you want to make sure your arm is not bending, right, but you also can reach, and don't try doing it like this. Actually put your hand in a fist. So this is correct. Actually, I could use a little bit more space. So this is important, right, to give yourself enough space to work with. Second is the bench. So I always believe that sitting a little bit higher, it's always better than sitting a little bit lower at the piano. So what we want ideally is for our elbow to be slightly above the keyboard or at the same level as the keyboard, but definitely not lower. So if your elbow is too low, even ½ inch low, it's already going to affect your technique and your progress at the piano. So let's make sure the bench is in the proper position and the distance is also the right one. Now let's continue. So the next step is to actually look at our feet. Super important. So we're going to go from the bottom to the top. So as you sit at the piano, we want to make sure that our legs making a 90-degree angle, right? So it's very important, because this is the way to feel balanced and relaxed. So very often, way too often, I see this in my students when people are doing this, right? Or they doing something like that when they practice. And so none of this actually a good idea. So we want to place our feet very close to the pedals as if we're just about to use them. We mostly practice without pedal, and that's always a good idea. But even though we're not going to press the pedal, the feet is going to be very nearby, right? But make sure it's not far away. And the feet are normally the least disciplined one when it comes to practicing. I also very often see my students putting their feet here. And to be honest, I do that sometimes too, but I always have to catch myself doing that and just make sure I place them back. In fact, legendary pianist Sviatoslav Richter, when people ask him what are your two secrets of performing well, he said, I have two secrets. Number one is that my left foot is glued to the floor. And why he mentions left foot and not both feet is because right foot normally uses the pedal, right? And left foot sometimes is the one who starts wandering a lot. And I honestly see it even sometimes during performance of professional musicians, when it just becomes very restless. So we really want to watch that foot and make sure we glue it to the floor when we practice. You don't have to press, right? So he just used this as an expression, but it needs to be very stable and stay in one position. And secret number two, according to Richter, is to always keep his stomach relaxed. Don't worry if your belly sticks out a little bit, it really doesn't matter. So, but we want to make sure that your stomach is relaxed and you breathe freely and nothing is on the way of this calm breathing. All right, and one very important comment about the pedaling. We need to pedal with our big toe. So that way the pedal is a lot more sensitive, is a lot more subtle, and you are able to have much better and much more responsive foot. So don't put your foot too far away, right? That's mainly a problem. A lot of times I also see people pedaling like this. That's one of the worst things ever, right? Because if you try to pedal like this, right, so my heel is not touching the floor, it creates a really big tension in your entire leg. So that's not a good idea. But many students that I observe and encounter actually pedal like this. It's not correct. So the heel is always, again, glued to the floor. We pedaling with a big toe, right? So the pedal, sometimes it might seem a little bit, at first it might seem a little uncomfortable, but then you really appreciate that positioning, right? Because it gives you a lot more a lot more sensitivity, I would say, on the pedaling. And last comment about the pedaling. So when I pedal correctly, you see that this part of my leg is not moving. If you see and if you feel that this front part of your leg is actually moving, right? It's just going up and down. There's probably something going on with your pedaling. So please watch that very carefully. So when I pedal, only the foot, right? Only my foot is working, and the leg needs to just continue to stay still. So please watch that. Now to the upper body position. So we want to make sure that when we play the piano, our whole upper body is actually quite relaxed. But it's not relaxed to the point of, that we feel like a bag with some potatoes, right? So we don't need that. But at the same time, we don't want to be having the back that is straight this way, right? Because again, it creates tension. So we need to find something in between, right? Of overly relaxed or just too much straight back and too much tension. So it's somewhat relaxed, and your shoulders doesn't have to be this way or positioned this way, but you can just find a way where you don't slouch, right? But obviously your back is somewhat straight. And again, I want to remind you, and I know I do it all the time, that we should play from the back. What it means is that if you imagine that there is a lake right in the middle of your back, you want to imagine that the water from this lake is really going through your entire arm, through the shoulder, through the elbow, through the wrist, and into the fingertip. If you're watching this lecture and you're comfortable and available and you're not driving, so please do this with me. So just lay your right hand on top of your left hand, and make sure it's important to scan your body when you play piano, right? So it's a physical process, and sometimes we are too much in our heads, right, in our minds, and we forget about the body, but body is very important. So just make sure your body is all relaxed 100%, your hand, and it's laying very comfortably, and you should feel the heaviness of your hand on the left hand. Then you can do the same with this hand, right? And if you let go, the hand needs to fall down. So this is exactly the feeling that we want to generate, right? Because our goal is to always play feeling the arm as a whole. A lot of times when I teach and when I observe students playing, I see a couple of little scenes here and there. Scene number one is that people play like this, right? So you see how my wrist is, because it's too low, right? It immediately disconnects my fingers or my hand from the rest of my arm. So in order for this not to happen, right? So it's all one flow. You want to make sure your wrist is in a correct level, right? It's just a little higher than probably you used to, but this is correct way of doing it. Now, second scene, super important, is the thumb, right? It deserves a chapter in the book just for the thumb, because the thumb is your speed. If the thumb is too low, right, even a little bit lower, it's, first of all, what it does, it brings your whole arm down, right? So you immediately start feeling the weight of your elbow on your fingers. So it's almost like you put a really heavy backpack and just somebody tell you run, but you can run, but not very fast, right? Because it bothers you. So thumb is a backpack, right? Make sure you have a very light or no backpack at all. In fact, if you place your thumb correctly, let's think about like what is the exact part of the thumb that you're playing with. You're playing with this little corner of this finger, right? It's very different from the rest of our fingers, right? Because with the rest of our fingers, we want to place our fingers on this little cushion right here, right? But thumb, you can't do it. Otherwise, you would have to play this way, right? So thumb should be positioned right here, and you should play. When you use thumb, you should play with this little corner of your nail and just a little bit of that skin. And if you practice a lot, placing the thumb correctly, even your nail starts growing slightly differently. I experienced that in the conservatory, where I was, introduced to those concepts about thumb Unfortunately, it was a little late, but it's never too late, trust me. So, and my nail, I start seeing that my nail starts growing a bit differently. You know, it wasn't ugly, but it was just a bit different. So important, very, very important finger. And I want to tell you that historically, when the piano ancestors were invented, clavichord and harpsichord, right, all these keyboard, early keyboard instruments, people actually did not use thumb at all. In fact, this was finger 1, this is finger 2, 3, and 4. They used only 4 fingers. Why? Because they figured, well, you know, this finger is just kind of on its own, it's so far away from the rest of this finger family, and it's just so awkward to use it, we're not going to use it. So people played like this with 4 fingers on harpsichords and clavichords. Sometimes when they needed to use thumb occasionally, they would write plus. So if you see, I actually saw some of the early scores for keyboard music, and first I was confused why it's 1, 2, 3, 4 and some kind of plus. And then one of my teachers said, oh, well, this is plus for thumb because thumb was not used historically. One of the first composers who started to use thumb in his music was actually Johann Sebastian Bach, because he started to experiment with using difficult keys with more than 3 or 4 sharps or flats, right? With 5 flats, 6 flats, 7 flats, and so forth. So he was, and then he realized very quickly that it's impossible, you know, to have this kind of limitation of not inviting thumb into the music. So he started to use it. And of course, if we then look into the history of piano music, right, with Beethoven's music, music of Rachmaninoff, Liszt, obviously it's hard to imagine playing those pieces without using the thumb. But it just tells you something. Knowing that historical aspect will actually remind you that this finger is just, there's something interesting about it, and we have to find out what's the very right way of using that. And to conclude our mini lecture on the body positioning, I want to talk a little bit about your neck and your chin. You always want to make sure, I know it's not always possible, but this is the goal, right? That the chin is always somewhat high, right? Because there's really nothing, yes, I know we have to sometimes look at our hands, but if we already at the point when we know our piece memorized and we play with somewhat freedom, it's very important to understand that the sound comes from here, right? From the strings. So we, in order to really listen to what's going on and just not have this limited listening, we want to make sure we sit this way. And again, so many times I see people's neck is bending basically, right, when they just like so occupied with what's going on here. One of the most important skills of the pianist is that you are not looking at your hands. You don't have to constantly look at your fingers, right? You can actually, you know your instrument well enough where you can start trusting your fingers to play the right keys, so that way you can actually sit a lot more straight, right? Your neck is not bending, and you can start listening to what's coming. And you can still, you know, you have enough vision, right, to observe sometimes from time to time what's going on, but try not to sit this way, right, because it really creates unnecessary tension in your neck. I hope that helps and reminds you of the correct body positioning. And personally, I do believe that the physical aspect of piano playing is sometimes a bit neglected, but I do believe if you're playing with proper posture, proper hand position, proper body and leg position, right? So you actually will feel a lot more relaxed, a lot more grounded, a lot more stable. And so it will help you, it actually will enable you to do more at the keyboard and actually focus on the music, and will ultimately give you much better outcomes. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you tune into your body and scan your body and always remind yourself to do the right thing. Thank you.